Hmm. Alright. Is the audio working? That's a good question. I don't know. Well, the levels seem to be showing okay. That's at least good. Well, yeah, as the title says, today I'm gonna be discussing many of the arguments relating to simulation theory, the real world, and, well, because I'm bored and I need to clear a bunch of water, so that's what I'm doing. We're gonna start with the most popular one, and that's the Bostrom simulation argument, which goes something like this. Basically, if simulations can be created and civilizations that are advanced enough to create simulations actually want to create simulations, then we are most likely in a simulation, because there will be many more universes which are simulated than the non-simulated ones. Just because, well, it's kind of like the argument goes that there's a single universe that is original, but then from that universe can stem an infinite number of simulated universes, because inside of a perfect simulated universe you can create another simulated universe, and so on and so on. So that is why it argues that we are most likely living in a simulated universe, unless some of the arguments are false. And I mentioned that civilizations that are advanced enough to create universes actually want to create universes, which, I mean, we kind of know is true, but we also sort of don't know. I mean, humanity is not exactly advanced enough to create a civilization like on the level that this argument requires. The only civilization we've known is basically like human civilizations, and the modern human civilization is the most advanced one, at least in the relation to, well, simulating universes. Of course, there has been no other civilization that's been better at like computers and simulations than the current one, but of course there were some other civilizations in history which were better at other things, like I don't know, perhaps certain art skills. Like, you could argue that in the past art was better. I mean, many people do, at least. So yeah, well, that's not the point. So yeah, that was the first argument, and the second was this, the computational feasibility argument. Basically, it asks whether or not it's actually like possible to have a computer good enough to simulate an entire universe for the purpose of this argument, for which I actually recently thought of an argument which of course existed. I mean, okay, in the modern time you can barely think of anything that hasn't existed before, but I've only found like 3 or 4 mentions of it on the internet, and that's, well, actually there's 2 subversions of it. And the main one, the one I thought of first, is the idea that our universe, like, because all of these arguments are arguing whether or not we are in a simulated universe, and our universe could be a simplification. Like, many people, they think that it's actually unlikely that we are in a simulated universe, because they think that simulating an entire universe is just not possible. Which, of course, well, is sort of... wait, I was just looking at the audio levels and it's very loud. Perhaps I should actually have connected headphones to the computer to hear what it sounds like for you. Well, I'm gonna just turn it down in OBS and hope that the stream is more enjoyable like that. No one's gonna watch it anyways, so... yeah, I need to put out some episode here. I have a box. This one's blue. Blue for weapons. Seems appropriate. Alright, so yeah, back to the computational feasibility argument. And many people do argue that it would just not be feasible to create a simulation of an entire universe, because to simulate an entire universe you would need resources beyond the entire universe, because like, okay, if you want to simulate every single little quantum particle, you need a lot of energy and you need a lot of storage. To write down the data for every single particle, like, it could be argued that the easiest way to store data, for example, for the position of a particle, is to just have a particle in that position, because then you store perfectly the data of that particle, and also you let it, well, yeah, basically, and in that way, if that is the most efficient way to store data about a particle, basically, then you cannot have enough storage in the universe to store the data about another whole universe, and ergo you can't simulate a universe. But as I mentioned before, there's two arguments I hold, and some other people, of course, that counteract that. And that first, we assume that our universe, so like for the arguments, the potentially simulated one, has this absolutely same laws of physics and complexity as the parent universe, but nothing that we know actually argues for that, except like perhaps that simulating a universe of the same complexity is just more useful for the parent universe. Therefore, it's more likely for a parent universe to decide to simulate a universe of the same complexity. But there are, of course, other uses for simulating universes of lower complexity. For example, we might want to simulate a universe which just includes a single planet, like Earth, to find out how the weather will be tomorrow. And our world might be something similar, but of course on a larger scale, not just Earth, but the entire universe, which for the civilization that is simulating our universe could be something like Earth. Perhaps there's more that we just cannot comprehend because it doesn't exist in our universe, because it was not created to simulate those aspects of the parent universe. And that argument, of course, allows for feasible computer possibilities for simulating, while and then the other part of this argument is the temporal thing. The temporal part of the argument is like, of course, the universe has 4 dimensions, I mean ours, as far as we know. And one of them is time. And what's so useful about time, you don't exactly need to simulate all of it. Like, for simulation to be useful, you don't need to simulate all, like, 500 trillion years of the universe before heat death to find out what will happen in the first 10 billion. You could just simulate the first 10 billion and then leave it at that. And then, if your universe is larger in the time dimension, then you can of course just like spend more time simulating the simulation universe, which would be at the same complexity. And this kind of delayed rendering, sort of, like where you render it not at real time, but just render of the time points slower than they actually happen, then you could have a fully complex simulation of the parent universe created within the parent universe without interfering with basically like even the known laws of physics. So our universe could be a simulated universe which only lasts for like 20 or 50 billion years, which we of course don't know. Like for us, at least for the point of this stream being recorded, the universe has only existed for 13.8 billion years. Therefore, we like have basically no way of knowing whether or not the universe actually continues for 500 trillion and more, or it just stops after like 10, after 20 or 50 billion. So in that case, our universe could be like the maximum complexity, and and the same complexity as the parent universe, but also be able to be like computationally handled in a computer in the parent universe. And of course, the same argument also goes for space. Like, we don't exactly need time. Like, we limited one dimension of the universe, and now it became easier to render. But you could also limit the spatial dimensions of the universe. It would also become easier to render. For example, you could just limit the universe to one solar system, or to one galaxy, or to one supercluster of galaxies, or to one observable universe, which from our perspective, like, nothing would change if the universe was rendered beyond the observable universe, because we literally physically cannot observe anything beyond our observable universe. But the computational requirements for such a renderment of a universe, such a simulation, would become vastly smaller if you only rendered a little bit of it. And then you can, of course, combine that. You don't need to render the entire time of the universe. You don't need to render the entire spatial vastness of the universe. You can just take a chunk which is important to you. And I guess we should discuss the reasons for creating a simulation if we want to talk about whether or not it is likely that we are in a simulation, because which is actually quite different from other things in the universe. Simulations, they actually like have reasons behind them, because sentient beings make them, and not just simple physical processes. So in this case, the reason is actually quite important, and there are many reasons for creating a simulation. Even with the comprehension that we have as humanity, creating a simulation for example, predicting something in the parent universe can be very useful. We have many of those, like very simple simulation, like incredibly simple, like not even close to what we are talking here in these arguments, but simulations of the weather on Earth, which allows us to have forecasts. They are also simulations, incredibly simple ones, and that is one use case. And then also you can have the use case of entertainment, like civilizations very advanced. If we assume that how humanity evolved is how most advanced civilizations will evolve, would have the concept of boredom, because boredom is very important for how humanity evolved. Then a civilization which also has boredom would require entertainment, and creating an entire universe is quite the goldmine of entertainment. So that is a very likely reason for why they could be created. And there's also, of course, many more, not just entertainment and prediction. Also, scientific study. You can try to figure out why something happened in the past, not only predict what will happen in the future. So all these reasons are incredibly useful for a simulation, but they also dictate how a simulation will be created, at least like under the comprehension we humans have, and that is that a simulation would be better if it rendered like the more area basically it renders, the more volume it renders, the better the simulation is, because then it can more accurately predict what will happen in the parent universe. But also, it does say that that is not a 100% requirement. It would be better, but a simulation which only includes 50 billion years would predict correctly the history of the parent universe, while requiring not as much computational requirements. So yeah, all that boils down to that a simulation created of basically the computational requirements for a simulation are not exactly a foolproof argument against a simulation being against a simulation existing, even if we actually knew for sure that the computation, like in our universe, with the complexity of our universe, creating a universe of the same complexity is not possible, then we still can't be sure that we aren't in a simulation, just because of those few arguments. Well, that one took quite a bit. Let's get to the next one, and the next one will be the Fermi paradox and the simulation paradox, which speaks of the that we haven't seen any extraterrestrial life yet, even though it would be quite likely under what we know. Like, there's nothing special about our planet, about our solar system. There's many in the universe that are very similar to our planet and our solar system. And if extraterrestrial life evolved similarly to us, they would already be sending out many electromagnetic signals, like radio waves and just light. And we should be able to notice them, and we haven't yet, not even seen any extraterrestrial life. So that could be happening because we are in a simulated universe, which was simulated by a parent universe where humanity exists but more advanced, and they only simulated us because they only want to predict or see how history ran with just us. But I mean, that argument doesn't exactly actually matter for the history one, because if they were trying to see what the history of their civilization was in the past, creating us and not showing us extraterrestrial life, if that extraterrestrial life was already seen in their parent universe, would of course throw off the simulation and make it less accurate. But of course, the simulation, the study of history, is not the only reason the simulation could have been created. So there could be some other reason for why they would remove extraterrestrial life. Perhaps to simplify the rendering and to make them more easily be able to handle simulating our universe. They removed all the other extraterrestrial life. Perhaps life is just difficult to simulate for them, for the parent civilization. So that could be why, that could be another argument for why why we are in simulation, and also an argument for why we are not. It could be both. Well, let's get to the next one, the quantum observer effect argument. And I'm not a quantum physicist, of course, but I think that argument is slightly blown out of proportion because of how it is viewed in the mainstream. Like, the quantum observer effect, just from the name and from how it's viewed, is like, ooh, when something is observed, it behaves differently just because it's observed. But it's not just the observing, it stems from the Heisenberg uncertainty principle that you cannot know the position and the velocity. And you cannot just know the position and the velocity. The velocity position cannot be, like, it doesn't actually have to include a observer. It still behaves without an observer and even with an observer. But yeah, basically, but that could still mean that that is just a simplification in our simulation, in the simulation of our universe, for the purpose of, again, alleviating the computer requirements, or perhaps the computers in the parent universe just are not capable of simulating quantum effects as they actually happen in their parent universe with entire complexities, so they have to create these simplifications. This argument is very scientific, and it isn't exactly, like, it's not something you can think your way out of. It requires experiments and theories, and it's very complex. I don't have much to say on it. So yeah, I'm gonna leave that be until more information is discovered. But it is an interesting one. And next, the fine-tuning argument, which is that the universe has several constants, like, for example, the big G constant, the gravitational constant, and they are very finely tuned to allow for the existence of life. which we sort of, being wife, assume that that's the main purpose of simulating a universe, to simulate the wife in it, and that because our universe is so finely tuned, basically those physical constants are the exact right to be able to support life, or just to be able to support a universe, period, because some versions of the physical constants wouldn't support stars existing, just matter existing, perhaps energy existing. I'm not sure about that one though. But matter for sure, at least somewhat complex matter like atoms or nucleons, those could not exist if the strong nuclear and weak nuclear forces were slightly different. And also their ratios to each other were different, and they could also not exist. So that is an argument for the simulation theory, because it says that life and the universe exists with those exact physical constants because the parent civilization created it that way, but it's kind of a circular argument, because if the physical constants are finely tuned for our existence, and the ones who tuned those physical constants had to exist in another universe, then their physical constants would also have had been finely tuned. So the probability of us being in a simulation in that case is no larger than without that argument whatsoever. So I don't think that argument is actually exactly very valid for the purposes of the simulation theory discussion. But it is an interesting one, and many people use it. Perhaps it does, perhaps there are ways of it that actually can describe things well, but I just don't see them. Well, let's get to the next one, the chunked temporal renderer. Oh yeah, I already had that one. Okay, I guess I got slightly mixed up with my own list there. And that one I already did. And alright, the nested simulation argument. Basically that if simulations can create their own simulations, then there will be infinitely more simulations. Well, not infinitely more, but just hyperbolizing, there are infinitely more simulations than the original worlds, because a single original world can create basically an infinite number of simulations. But for an original world to be created, like, we don't actually know how that would happen, so we don't have much argument there. But yeah, basically that is what it says, that it's much more likely that we are in a simulation, just because simulations are much easier to create. And because if you're, let's say we make like a Markov chain diagram, that's where you have like different states, and let's say one of the states is a original universe and one of the states is a simulated universe. A simulated universe can lead to a simulated universe because you can create another simulation inside the simulation if the simulation is perfect enough. But and also an original world can lead to a simulation, so both of those states can lead to simulations. But an actual world, like an original world, a simulation cannot create an original world. That's just not a possibility, not a probabilistic possibility. And potentially an original world could create an original world, but that's kind of like beyond what we know. We don't actually know how the universe was created, so we don't know whether or not. But there is a possibility there, while there is no possibility that the simulation could create an original world, which means that probabilistically, we don't actually know for sure, but it is more probable that it's a simulation because of that, which is another argument for the simulations. And there's also another like counter argument which puts it back down to 50% instead of being like 1 to an infinity. And that's that we, in our universe, don't actually have a simulation yet. Which means that we are either the original world before it created any simulations, or we are the west in the chain of the simulated worlds, which also hasn't created any simulations. There are, of course, and that brings it down to 50-50, the chance. That's a quite popular argument, or counter argument to the nested simulation argument, but there is also like a counterpoint to it. Why do we assume that we are the point of the simulation? Perhaps there is another extraterrestrial civilization that is actually the point of this simulation, and which has already created its own simulations. There could be a civilization like 50 light years away, for whom our existence is important, because at some point they discovered us via telescopes and like know our existence. So the simulation has to include us to simulate their civilization properly. And they are the ones who actually created the next simulation line. So that is a counter-argument to that, but of course we don't have enough information for that. It's just an interesting thing to think about. It's not exactly a argument you can get anything from, just because we don't have enough information yet. And another one is the technological progress argument, and it's for the existence of the simulation. It basically says that civilizations will progress technologically to create simulations, and if that is true, then we are much more likely to be in a simulation, just because that's what civilizations do. They make simulations. It's a simple one. It's actually might just be part of another argument I already discussed before, but it was worth saying it. Perhaps if someone heard it only by that name and didn't recognize it in my previous time. So yeah, that is something somewhat useful. And now to the yeah, the last one on my list is also actually already discussed. It actually happens surprisingly often, where I just have a list, and then when I'm like halfway down the list, every single thing in the last half I've already discussed, just because I found better transitions, or perhaps I just wanted to discuss it faster. So yeah, that's basically it for the stream. I've discussed all the simulation arguments I wanted to, and I've also cleared out about 100 blocks of water, which is surprisingly very badly. Very bad. I mean, I guess it also includes me mining down the snow, which before, as you might see here, I have a giant perimeter. I've cleared out this single line, which is 3 blocks thick, which, okay, 3 blocks thick is the easiest thickness to clear out with sponges. And here, I'm also clearing out in 3 block thick things, but I'm clearing it out perpendicular to the main walls and not parallel like I did there. And it's also a sort of fuse, like that one was easier and like faster to clear out than this. Although the actual area of this, it could be argued that the area of this is already larger than that, because it's well much thicker. I think it slightly isn't. It also could be my my feeling of time is slightly wrong here, because it's not like I have a clock to measure. Well, I do have a clock, I just don't look at it to see how quickly I do all this water clearing. I mean, it's kind of by design. All this water clearing is meant to be chill. Don't want it to be like a quest for the fastest water clearing. You would have understood that when you saw my water clearer machines. They were so scuffed, they worked so badly. I think I'll still be using them. They're just sort of less. It's much less annoying to clear out water when the height like of the highest sponge will be like if I'm able to mine out the highest sponge while standing on the ground, and like I don't have to jump around, fly on a lighter and remove the sponges. That's actually one of the most annoying parts of this whole thing. So I guess water clearers are the way. And I actually kind of get, yeah, this process I get to enjoy. I couldn't really exactly enjoy the building the water clearers process because they were so scuffed. They like broke all the time, and well, I mean, I guess I did design them myself, so what do I expect from my own broken redstone? Perhaps if I took someone else's design, it would have been faster and easier. But I also don't see how. Like, my perimeter is not exactly the easiest to water clear. It's quite big, the floor varies in height quite a bit. So those are problems that I had to deal with my own design. Which it doesn't exactly deal with, it's more like I try to deal with it and then never could. But yeah, simple things. Well, I'm gonna be finishing up then now. Some good water clearing done, some discussing of simulation arguments done. All fun and good.